dire wolves. I mean, you've seen them on TV, right? Legends.
Huge cultural icons now, yeah.
And now this company, Colossal Biosciences, they're saying they've actually done it. De-extinction.
That's the claim.
We're talking Romulus and Remus, these 5-month-old cubs they have somewhere in America, calling them direwolves.
And there's a third one now, too, apparently, Khaleesi.
Right, Khaleesi. It's definitely a story that grabs your attention.
Oh, absolutely. It taps right into that fantasy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Bringing something back from, 13,000 years ago? Especially something so, cool.
Exactly. But the big question is, is this really a direwolf resurrection? Or is it something else?
Mm-hmm. Because there's definitely excitement, but also a fair bit of skepticism from scientists.
And that's what we want to dig into. You want to understand what's really going on, cut through the noise, get the real picture, but without wading through, super dense scientific papers.
Yep, get to the heart of it.
So that's our deep dive today. Let's try to figure out this whole direwolf thing.
Okay, well, to really get what's happening now, I think we need to step back a bit to how we even knew about direwolves in the first place.
Right. Where did they come from?
It actually starts back in 1854 with fossils found in America near the Ohio River. That was the first discovery.
Okay, 1854. And then someone had to figure out what they were.
Exactly. Yeah. A few years later, 1858, this scientist, Joseph Leidy, he looked at them. He put them in the Canis genus.
Canis. That's dogs, wolves, coyotes, that group.
That's the one. And he called it Canis dirus, which, basically means scary dog.
Scary dog. I like it. So the thinking, Len, was it's just another member of the dog family.
Pretty much, yeah. A big, scary member. But then, later on, 1918, another scientist, John Merriam, he studied a ton of fossils from the La Brea tar pits in L.A.
Oh, yeah. The tar pits must have been loads there.
Thousands. And Merriam, he looked at them and thought, these look different enough. Maybe they deserve their own genus, separate from Canis.
Did people agree?
Not really, no. This idea kind of got ignored for a long time. The general view remained that, direwolves were basically just really big, close cousins of gray wolves.
But that changed recently.
Big time. In 2021, there was this major study published in Nature. It used ancient DNA analysis.
Oh, the DNA evidence always shakes things up.
It really did here. It showed that direwolves actually split off from the line, leading to modern wolves and coyotes way, way earlier than we thought.
How early?
Around 5.7 million years ago.
Wow, okay. That's not a close cousin. That's a whole different branch of the family tree. Way back.
Exactly. So definitely not just a slightly bigger version of a gray wolf. And here's another key finding from that study.
Yeah.
They found that direwolves lived alongside gray wolves and coyotes here in North America for a really long time.
Okay.
But they didn't interbreed. Their genes stayed separate.
Huh. So they were sharing the landscape, but not mingling genetically.
Seems that way. And then about 13,000 years ago, poof, direwolves are gone. Extinct.
But the gray wolves made it through.
Yep. Gray wolves survived. Which obviously raises the question.
Right.
Why?
Yeah, what happened? Why did one make it and the other didn't?
Well, the main theories focus on sort of environmental changes and how adaptable they were. One idea is that direwolves were highly specialized hunters.
Hunting what?
Really big stuff. Megafauna, things like ancient horses, maybe even young mammoths, stuff that also went extinct around the same time.
Ah, so their main food source vanished. Maybe due to climate change or something.
That's a strong possibility. If your menu disappears, you're in trouble. And the other part of it might be that lack of interbreeding we mentioned.
How would that hurt them?
Well, if you can't mix genes with other related species, you might lack the genetic diversity, the flexibility to adapt when conditions change quickly. Gray wolves could and did interbreed sometimes, picking up useful traits. Dire wolves apparently couldn't or didn't.
Okay, that makes sense. A specialist struggles when the specialty disappears, and they couldn't adapt easily. So physically, what did they look like compared to today's wolves? Forget Game of Thrones for a second.
Yeah, let's stick to the science. They were definitely bigger than gray wolves. On average, maybe 25% larger.
Okay, so bigger, but not like horse size.
No. Bigger, heavier build. Their heads were notably longer and wider too, and their jaws, seriously powerful, built for crushing bone.
Oof. Okay, tough. What about fur?
The thinking is probably lighter fur than many gray wolves. Maybe sort of sandy or even whitish in some cases. But yeah, the giant, almost lion-sized wolf from the show, that's definitely fantasy.
Got it. Okay, so that's the real direwolf. Now, bringing something like that back, how would you even try to do that? What are the methods for this? de-extinction thing?
Right. Well, scientists talk about three main approaches, broadly speaking.
Okay. What's number one?
Number one is called backbreeding.
Backbreeding.
Yeah. You take living relatives of the extinct animals that still have some of the traits the extinct one had, and you selectively breed them. Generation after generation, you pick the ones that look most like the extinct animal.
Trying to dial up those old traits again?
Exactly. The Quagga project is probably the best known example.
The quagga, that was like a zebra, but only striped on the front half. From South Africa.
That's the one. Hunted to extinction in the late 1800s. So starting in the 1980s, scientists found some regular plain zebras that just happened to have fewer stripes on their back ends.
Okay.
And they started breeding those together. And over many generations, they've produced zebras that, yeah, look more like the old photos and specimens of quaggas.
But are they genetically quaggas?
Ah, that's the key point. No. They look similar, maybe, but they're still genetically plain zebras. You're just selecting for certain appearances. You're not actually bringing back the original unique quagga genes that were lost.
So it's more like creating a lookalike. A tribute band, maybe?
Haha, yeah, that's not a bad analogy. It's appearance, not the original genetic code.
Okay. So backbreeding gets you something like it, but not it. What's method two?
Method two is cloning, creating a genetically identical copy.
Like Dolly the sheep.
It's exactly like Dolly. The idea is you need a living cell, or at least a really well-preserved cell nucleus from the extinct animal.
Which seems like a big if for something long extinct.
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
But if you had it, you'd take that nucleus and put it into an egg cell from a closely related living species. But first, you remove the original nucleus from that egg cell.
Okay, so you're putting the extinct animal's genetic blueprint into the egg machinery of a living relative.
Precisely. Then you stimulate the egg to start developing as if it were fertilized, implant it in a surrogate mother, and hope it develops into a healthy clone of the extinct animal.
Has this actually been tried for de-extinction?
Yes, once. Really seriously. With the bucardo, or Pyrenean ibex, it's a type of Spanish mountain goat.
Okay. What happened?
The very last one died in 2000, but scientists had managed to get some skin cells just before that. They tried the cloning process using domestic goat eggs and surrogates. Well, sort of, then tragically no. They got a few pregnancies, but only one clone was actually born alive, and it died within minutes. It had severe lung defects.
Oh, wow. That's heartbreaking, really. And it shows how difficult cloning is.
Extremely difficult, especially with older, possibly damaged DNA. The success rate is incredibly low, and the health problems for clones can be significant.
Right. So just getting good DNA is hard, and then the cloning process itself is fraught with problems, which leads us to method three, the one Colossal is using.
Yes, method three, genetic engineering. This is where things get really complex, but it's also seen as maybe the most promising for older extinctions where cloning isn't feasible.
How does it work?
Okay, so first, you get whatever DNA you can recover from fossils. It's usually broken into tiny pieces, degraded, incomplete.
Like finding fragments of an old book?
Good analogy.
Yeah.
Then you sequence those fragments and compare them to the complete, high-quality genome of the closest living relative. For the direwolf, that's the gray wolf.
Okay, so you compare the broken direwolf book to the complete gray wolf book.
Exactly. You identify the key differences, the genetic sequences that you think made the direwolf distinct. Then you use gene editing tools.
Like CRISPR?
Like CRISPR-Cas9. Yeah. The genetic scissors. You use it to go into the living relative's DNA, the gray wolf cells in this case, and you edit its genes to match the direwolf sequences you found in the fossils.
So you're rewriting parts of the gray wolf book to look more like the direwolf fragments.
That's the idea. You modify the gray wolf cells in the lab, and then you use cloning techniques like taking the nucleus from these modified cells and putting it into an egg cell to try and create an embryo with this engineered DNA.
Wow. Okay, that is intricate. And that's where Colossal Biosciences comes in. They're the ones doing this.
They are. They launched in 2021, founded by Ben Lamb, and she's a well-known geneticist. And yeah, they have some really big headline-grabbing goals.
Well, I remember hearing about the woolly mammoth first.
That was their flagship project, yes.
Yeah.
Trying to create a mammoth-like elephant using Asian elephant DNA edited with mammoth genes.
And they're also looking at the Tasmanian tiger, the thylacine.
They are. And the dodo bird, too.
Those all sound incredibly difficult.
Oh, they are. Each one has unique, massive challenges. For the mammoth, you're dealing with elephants, which have, what, a 22-month gestation period? Very slow process.
Yeah, it takes forever.
The Tasmanian tiger was a marsupial. It gives birth to tiny, underdeveloped young that finish developing in a pouch. We don't exactly have artificial pouch technology ready to go.
Right, another huge hurdle. And the dodo.
Well, it's a bird. Working with bird reproduction and genetics, especially editing and cloning, is very different and has its own set of complexities compared to mammals.
So given all those huge challenges with the mammoth thylacine dodo, why suddenly pivot or, focus attention on the direwolf in 2023? Was it just easier?
That's likely part of it, but I suspect a big factor was popularity.
Game of Thrones again.
Probably. Game of Thrones, World of Warcraft, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
The direwolf is just cool in pop culture right now. Announcing progress on something so recognizable, that generates buzz, public interest, maybe even investment. It's a smart move from a publicity standpoint.
Okay, makes sense. So how did they actually do it for these cubs, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi? Walk us through their specific steps.
Okay, so they sourced their direwolf DNA fragments from two main places. A 13,000-year-old tooth from a cave in Ohio,
Okay.
and a much older 70,000-year-old skull from Idaho. They say this gave them a lot more data than previous studies, like 500 times more, though still not the complete genome.
Right, still fragments, and then they compared it to the gray wolf.
Yep. They targeted 14 specific genes.
Only 14 out of how many? Thousands.
Tens of thousands, yeah. They picked 14 genes they believe were key for those distinct direwolf features: body size, head shape, maybe fur color, fluffiness, things like that. External traits, mostly.
And they used CRISPR to edit those 14 genes?
Correct. They used CRISPR-Cas9, the Nobel Prize-winning tech, to make about 20 specific changes within those 14 selected genes. They did this in gray wolf cells growing in a lab dish.
20 edits across 14 genes. Okay, so they created these modified gray wolf cells. Then what?
Then came the cloning part. Around mid-2024, they took the nuclei from these edited wolf cells, the nuclei containing the altered DNA, and put them into dog egg cells.
Dog eggs, not wolf eggs.
The dog eggs, yeah. Dog eggs that had their own original nuclei removed first. So basically using the dog egg as a vessel.
Okay, how many embryos did they make?
They created 45 of these reconstructed embryos and implanted them into 2 surrogate mother dogs.
2 dogs carried all those.
Well, 2 dogs received the embryos. Out of those implantations, they got 2 successful pregnancies.
Which led to?
Romulus and Remus, born by C-section on October 1st, 2024. And then Khaleesi followed later, born January 30th, 2025.
And since they all came from the same batch of edited cells, they're basically clones of each other. The 3 cubs.
Genetically, yes.
Mm-hmm.
They should be virtually identical, carrying the same set of 20 edits on that gray wolf background.
But are they behaving identically?
Interestingly, no. Colossal has mentioned observing clear behavioral differences even between Romulus and Remus who were born together. They said Remus is bolder, more adventurous, while Romulus is more cautious.
Huh. So even with the same edited genes, they're not carbon copies in personality.
Nope. It's a great reminder that genetics isn't everything. Environment, upbringing, maybe even tiny random variations in development, it all plays a role in shaping the individual animal.
Fascinating. Okay, let's get back to the core question.
Mm.
We have these cubs, born from edited wolf DNA via dog surrogates. Are they really direwolves?
Okay, this is where we need to be really clear. Scientifically speaking, no. What Colossal has created are genetically engineered gray wolves.
Engineered gray wolves.
Yes. They started with the full genetic blueprint of a gray wolf and made a very small number of targeted changes, those 20 edits, in 14 genes. These changes were inspired by the fragmented DNA they found from actual direwolves, but it's still fundamentally a gray wolf genome that's been tweaked.
So even if they managed to make them look a bit like the fossils, bigger head, maybe lighter fur, underneath, it's still 99-point-something% gray wolf.
Exactly. Way more than 99%. Think about the sheer scale. A wolf genome has billions of DNA letters, tens of thousands of genes, changing 20 spots in 14 genes. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of the whole picture.
Can you give an analogy, maybe?
Sure. Think about humans and chimpanzees. Our DNA is incredibly similar, like 98.8% identical.
Right.
But that 1.2% difference accounts for all the distinctions between us and them. It's huge in effect. So conversely, making a handful of changes to a gray wolf based on incomplete direwolf data doesn't magically turn it into a direwolf. It's still a wolf, just with a few specific modifications.
It's like changing the font on a few words in a book doesn't make it a completely different book.
That's a good way to put it. To truly recreate an extinct animal, genetically speaking, you'd need its entire perfect genome sequence and the technology to assemble that from scratch and make it work inside a cell. We are nowhere near that for something extinct for 13,000 years.
So it's more accurate to call them direwolf-like wolves, maybe? Or engineered wolves?
Those terms are much closer to the scientific reality than calling them actual de-extincted direwolves.
Okay, now Colossal has these engineered wolves. What are their plans? Are they going to breed thousands of them, release them?
Their stated plan, for now, is quite limited. They've talked about maybe creating only a few more individuals, perhaps 3 to 5 total, and they intend to keep them in specialized preserves, high security, with very restricted access. Not exactly releasing them into Yellowstone.
Okay, so more like a contained exhibit almost. But what about the animals themselves, from their perspective?
That's where the ethical questions really start to bite, isn't it? These cubs have no dire wolf parents to learn from. They won't learn natural hunting behaviors for prey that, well, doesn't even exist anymore in many cases.
Right, the giant sloths and mammoths are gone.
Exactly. They're destined for a life in a controlled environment, essentially as living curiosities. Is that a fulfilling life for a large, complex predator?
Mm.
And what happens to them down the line? Are we setting them up for a kind of second extinction in captivity?
That's a sobering thought, and it raises the bigger question about what de-extinction should even mean. Is it just about creating a spectacle, or should it be about restoring something ecologically?
That's the crux of the debate for many ecologists. Proponents might argue, well, we could eventually restore a large predator role in North America, something that's been missing, bring back ecological balance.
Is that Colossal's stated goal, ecological restoration, or is it more proof of concept, maybe even entertainment or profit-driven?
Their public statements often mention ecological benefits, but there's definitely debate about the primary motivations and whether this specific project achieves those aims. And there's a fundamental ecological problem, too.
Which is?
The original direwolves went extinct naturally, likely because the environment changed and their main food sources disappeared. The world they were adapted for 13,000 years ago doesn't exist today.
So where would they even fit in now? Their prey is gone.
Right. If they were released, what would they eat? They'd likely end up competing directly with the existing gray wolves, potentially disrupting current ecosystems. It might even recreate the very pressures that led to their extinction in the first place.
It feels like we haven't fully thought through the what next part.
It's a common criticism. The focus is often on the technical can we do it, without maybe enough emphasis on the ecological should we do it, and what happens if we do.
And this brings up another point people raise, resource allocation. All this money, this brain power, this cutting-edge tech, could it be used differently?
That's a huge part of the ethical discussion, yes. Many conservation scientists argue that these resources would be far better spent trying to save the species we still have, but are critically endangered right now.
Like you mentioned before, the northern white rhino, literally down to 2 females.
Exactly. Or countless other amphibians, insects, birds, mammals that are on the brink today because of human actions, habitat destruction, climate change.
That UN report from 2019 was stark, wasn't it? Over 1 million species at risk of extinction.
It was terrifying. And the argument is, shouldn't our priority be preventing those million extinctions rather than trying to undo one extinction with an animal that's genetically not even the real thing and has no clear place in today's world?
It's like the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Maybe we should focus on the prevention side of conservation.
That's certainly a powerful argument. Protecting existing biodiversity, maintaining the ecosystems we have now, seems, to many, a more urgent and ultimately more effective goal.
So, wrapping this up, it seems the direwolf de-extinction story is, well, complicated.
Very. It's a remarkable display of genetic engineering capability, no doubt about it. Creating these animals is scientifically fascinating.
But they aren't really direwolves in a true genetic sense. They're engineered gray wolves with a few direwolf-inspired tweaks.
Correct. It highlights how far gene editing has come, but also its limitations when it comes to truly resurrecting a species wholesale from ancient degraded DNA.
And it forces us to confront some really big ethical and ecological questions about animal welfare, ecological roles, and ultimately our priorities.
Absolutely. It pushes us to think about what we value.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. Seeing this level of scientific effort, this ingenuity, these resources poured into creating these direwolf-like animals, what does that tell us about where our focus lies?
Yeah, is bringing back a ghost or an approximation of a ghost from the deep past the best way forward for ensuring a healthy, biodiverse future on Earth?
Or should we be pouring that same energy into saving what's right in front of us before it too becomes a ghost?
It's definitely something to think about long after this deep dive ends.